Nearly half of Tennessee inmates end up right back behind bars within 3 years after their arrest. That has led to a staggering rate of repeat offenders within our local jails. The facility failed to implement its discharge policy, but according to the records, this was much more than a simple oversight, rather an intentional cover-up of 4 patient deaths that happened on Crossroads Watch. If it was a time period beyond 5 years, would you feel good going home at night thinking, I'm doing everything I can to protect my officers?
No.
No plant, just plans. Where has the money gone? In fact, where the camera is right now, there was a car that was pushed off, flipped upside down. You can still see pieces of the car remain strewed along with the memories of this home right here. Our records request revealed over the last 3 months, 230 DUI cases are pending in Washington County General Sessions Court. Of those, at least 65 are drug related. But the DA's office tells me in reality, that number is far higher. Some of the examples of Molly here at the Washington County Sheriff's Office. One is a darker white form that you can see here. Others filled with what looks to be more like sand. You'll look behind me. This is just one of the homes that's facing damage. The roof has been ripped off. You'll see some of the shingles. The wind is picking up. Nowhere in that news release, which I'm looking at right now, does it even mention the chemical being released or the wastewater that was discharged into the river. When we first checked in with TBI 3 months ago, the turnaround time for a toxicology report was 9.5 months. Today, it's a time frame that TBI admits is still far too high. Here's what we know right now. Just moments ago, I spoke with the lead investigator, and he told me right around 9:42 this morning is when a person entered armed with a handgun demanding narcotics.
Clinics that we're aware of, there are about 5 that we are aware of.
There's absolutely no way that's true. We know it even in Johnson City.
That's correct.
Through the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, they actually have a website of what doctors are allowed to prescribe buprenorphine. That's Suboxone or Subutex. In Johnson City alone, there are at least 50 doctors who are able to prescribe this medication. When Russ walked out to check his main barn in the morning, he found that the foundation had been lifted about 6 inches off the ground. Any difference given the national context?
In Tennessee, none.
A fine for not wearing your seatbelt in Tennessee is $10. Littering, a $50 fine plus court costs. The fine for Lee, charged with 6 counts of animal cruelty, $2 per horse. You know, we could talk about the damage all that we want, but the visuals are what really take your breath away. I'm going to step out of the shot right now just to describe to you the story of the man that lives here right now, he and his wife. If you look up at the porch on the corner, he was standing at the edge right there when the tornado hit. He went and looked off his back porch, saw the funnel coming, then ducked back around the corner and saw all of the damage that you can now see behind me. Through a public records request with the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, I obtained copies of 2011 through 2014 deficiency reports for Crossroads, Weaverville, Asheville, and Greensboro clinics. Among the hundreds of pages, penalties for failure to protect patients from harm, abuse, neglect, or exploitation, failure to ensure state and national criminal record checks for employees within 5 days of hire, inadequate training, dosing errors, and failure to ensure client program compliance. If you think that those are concerning, one stood out above the rest related to patient deaths. It's 4:30 in the morning. 50 to 70 miles outside the Tri-Cities. Long before the sun rises, the hazy glow of these lights provide what some would call a beacon of hope for those whose lives have been consumed by darkness.
Nobody grows up saying, oh, I want to be an addict.
Many consider it the underbelly of society, a population consumed by addiction cast into the shadows. According to state documents, for at least 300 traveling from the Tri-Cities, the day starts here.
5, sometimes 6 times a week.
At a Crossroads Treatment Center's clinic that provides methadone, just across the state line in Asheville or Weaverville, North Carolina.
I'm only 26 years old, and this clinic has saved my life.
Many patients say the travel along the highway keeps them off the streets.
It's a wonderful thing.
But the commute presents real challenges.
I spend probably about $120 a week in fuel coming over here. There's a choice sometimes between driving that extra distance and eating.
Crossroads hopes to eliminate the travel barrier by opening its 10th clinic in Johnson City.
In a lot of cases, it is the only treatment option that can keep people away from IV drug use, putting medications up their nose, doctor shopping, stealing to buy drugs, So there's no question it's life-saving.
Addiction treatment expert and professor at East Tennessee State University, Dr. Stephen Lloyd, treats opiate-addicted pregnant women at High Point Clinic, a nonprofit clinic in Johnson City.
These are very complicated issues.
While he says there's a place for methadone in the Tri-Cities, it's a powerful drug that needs to be regulated and comprehensive treatment done right.
I mean, what kind of certification do you have to have in order to treat addiction? You know, it is the Wild West out there, Kylie.
I started digging through public records from other states where Crossroads operates and found a state inspection report from Crossroads Treatment Center of Northwest Georgia. The report from November 2012 reveals 12 of 14 appointed substance abuse counselors were not certified or trained to provide addiction counseling services. A state interview with the clinical director documented in the same report revealed, quote, "I was not aware that you need certification in the state of Georgia. I thought a high school diploma was adequate. We hire our counselors and employ them as in training." Then, within a 139-page statement of deficiencies for Crossroads Greensboro Clinic dated July 2013, I discovered this. The facility failed to implement its discharge policy, but according to the records, this was much more than a simple oversight, rather an intentional cover-up of 4 patient deaths that happened on Crossroads watch. Text messages from May 2013 between a counselor and associate program director transcribed in the state report reveal the counselor was concerned. Quote, "You really thought it was a good idea to lie to the state? I know right from wrong. Lying is wrong. You can't sit here and say what was going on was ethical." According to the report, the associate program director replied, quote, "That was a selfish move on your part to tell the state about the deaths not being reported. You may have gotten us shut down, and I may not have a job." An interview with another counselor documented in the state report revealed, quote, "I had to change the documentation to show that he was absent for 7 consecutive days so he could be shown as discharged and a death report would not have to be reported. It was unethical and wrong." A state interview with the corporate director of clinical practices detailed in the same report confirms Crossroads of Greensboro discharged 4 patients after they died. The causes of death are not mentioned in the report. A letter from the state to Crossroads dated August 2013 indicated the State Department of Health and Human Services issued a $20,000 penalty for violation of the Protection from Harm, Abuse, Neglect, or Exploitation, and an intent to revoke the Greensboro Clinic's license. However, that intent was later dropped, allowing the clinic to keep its license and work out a settlement agreement with the state on the fines. Back in Weaverville, for the hundreds making the trek to treatment, it's a journey they hope comes to an end with the beginning of a Johnson City clinic.
I have a job, I have a husband. This clinic, it helps us and everybody here to stay off drugs and to stay on the right path.
We tried to talk with Crossroads about these reports, and I first began reaching out to co-founder Steve Kester and his attorney in July of last year. Kester never got back in touch with me. Then in the last 3 weeks since Crossroads applied for a certificate of need to open a clinic in Johnson City, I've called Crossroads corporate office, its attorney and CEO numerous times and sent several text messages as well. Last week, the CEO, Rupert McCormick, finally replied with a text that simply said, quote, "My on-the-record response at this time will need to be no comment at this time. We look forward to discussing soon," end quote.
And I just started screaming, and how? This is horrific.
Penelope Pear's father was sitting at a stop sign in Piney Flats before a woman hit him going 45 miles an hour, a crash that led to his death. Like anyone, Pear wanted to know what happened.
I said, was it alcohol? And they said no.
When a blood sample turns up negative for alcohol, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's toxicology units run the sample through a series of tests to determine if drugs were involved. That was the case for Patricia Ray, who Pear learned through a TBI official toxicology report was driving under the influence of several prescription drugs. But that answer didn't come until 23 weeks after the crash, more than 5 months after her father's death. The Sullivan County District Attorney's Office told me that was the expedited turnaround time.
Justice is not swift in these circumstances.
Not by a long shot, even though the Sixth Amendment guarantees those charged with a crime the right to a speedy trial. First Judicial District Attorney Tony Clark says right now he has a case that's a 4th offense DUI, which is a felony.
The blood results were obtained in May of last year, and we are still awaiting. Most recently, a vehicular homicide case, it took 11 months to get the drug alcohol back.
On top of the obvious strain that puts on both victims and the accused, the problem is this.
Cases have been dismissed or cases have been lost due to the time that it's taken to get the lab results back. It has happened.
Sullivan County DUI prosecutor Benjamin Rowe explained that the statute of limitations on some crimes can be 1 year.
If it's taking 11 months, you can do the math, and that only gives us around a month to determine whether or not it's something that should be presented to a grand jury. That puts a major strain on us.
It's a waiting game Rowe says sets the public up to lose.
The faster results come back, the better.
Because of that backlog, a person could get a DUI, then be charged with another DUI, all while awaiting the results of a toxicology report. I spoke with DUI prosecutor Joe Schultz, who told me that he has several cases like that pending right now.
Drugs is the one that takes a long time, and that's because of the increase of narcotics and prescription drugs.
It's actually legally prescribed drugs that we're finding in most of our DUIs.
And I think that could account for the increased processing time at the TBI laboratory.
While the TBI agrees there is a major prescription drug abuse problem in Tennessee, it denies that the increased number of blood samples requiring testing for DUIs involving narcotics is to blame for the backlog in its crime labs.
The change in law absolutely had an impact on the number of samples being sent to TBI for analysis.
In 2012, the state changed its implied consent law, meaning law enforcement could demand a blood sample if someone were suspected of driving under the influence.
When this law went into effect, it jumped hugely.
TBI provided me with numbers from the past 6 years of blood samples that came through the doors for testing. You can see the spike TBI referred to from 2011 to 2012, a 68% jump in the number of blood samples, the same year the new law passed. TBI's public information officer, Josh Devine, says this can't be a coincidence. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think that the change in the law, that's been almost 3 years ago.
As for the drop in 2013, that same year, the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional to draw someone's blood without consent. Now, a judge must sign a search warrant in order to do so. I had to ask, with the change in the state's implied consent law, how many times have police pulled over drivers when it comes to the no-refusal weekends? Through a public records request with Tennessee Highway Patrol, here's what I found. In the Fall Branch District, within the 10 no-refusal checkpoint weekends since 2012, there were 5 instances where troopers made just 1 or no DUI arrests. So statewide, is the law really to blame?
I think the backlog is a product of a couple of things.
Trooper Noah Click says beyond the no-refusal checkpoints and implementing the implied consent law, there's been a big push to up the numbers of DUI arrests overall.
Our numbers have increased dramatically, so there's more BACs for them to conduct.
Not to mention, he says, the point we brought up about the increasing number of prescription drugs involved in DUIs. I reached back out to TBI with the new information. It stands by its claim that the law created the major backlog. Either way, it's people like Pear still awaiting the sentence hearing of the woman who killed her father in a DUI more than a year and a half ago.
I don't want to say moved past, but you have to move forward.
Who are having a tougher time doing just that. TBI says in order to make sure law enforcement agencies have what they need as soon as possible, it brought on 5 additional forensic scientists at TBI's own expense. TBI also began outsourcing some cases last year. Now, Josh, the goal is to get these turnaround times down to 2 months. And within just the last half hour, I learned TBI is making some progress at least. The turnaround time for a toxicology report out of Knoxville now stands at 6 months. That's a 2-month improvement since December. In law enforcement agencies across the nation, there are 2 lines of defense officers don't leave home without: a gun and a bulletproof vest.
That might be my lifeline to go back to my family at the end of the shift.
There's so many things in this day and time that can happen. It doesn't matter if you just get out at a convenience store, you walk into a school, it's a dangerous world.
In Sullivan County, it's not surprising Sheriff Wayne Anderson requires every officer to wear their bulletproof vest. But what many may not realize, each of those vests have an expiration date.
They deteriorate over the years because of perspiration, wear and tear.
I asked a representative from Galls, a company that sells bulletproof vests, to break down what the 5-year shelf life the National Institute of Justice places on body armor really means.
Those 5 years is the absolute that they guarantee no failure from an impact of a weapon of the size that it's been certified for. After those 5 years, it's still viable probably, but it's not guaranteed.
After that time frame, if something were to happen,
If it's the chief, the county commission, whoever's making the decision takes that full financial responsibility.
if it was a time period beyond 5 years, would you feel good going home at night thinking, I'm doing everything I can to protect my officers?
No.
In Greene County, the number of bulletproof vests outside of that 5-year range is dramatically more than those that are. A risk Sheriff Pat Hankins learned the first time he took inventory.
What we discovered is that we had 40 vests, 40 men that were wearing vests at this time that were out of date.
40 men.
Yes.
Sheriff Hankins says a majority of the vests aren't just a couple months or even a couple of years old. Try a decade or even more.
The oldest vest I had was 16 years old.
Is an officer currently wearing that vest?
Yes, it is.
And that is how it'll remain. 2/3 of Greene County officers strapping themselves in bulletproof vests day in and day out that may or may not be effective until replacements arrive in about another month. We saw that statistic come alive during our visit to Greene County.
It's 11 years old this month.
See, you can't even see the date of issue. Right?
One patrol officer agreed to talk with us, but for safety concerns, we've concealed his identity. When did you get this vest that you're wearing now?
2006. It's a little bit disconcerting, especially when you have kids at home.
There was only one person we could bring these serious concerns to for explanation. Former Sheriff Steve Burns, whose 16-year reign over the department ended in September. He spoke candidly on several occasions, but denied an on-camera interview. Burns emphasized, quote, I would never put a vest on an officer that I felt was unsafe, and said a lot of those vests are still in good shape beyond the expiration date.
I mean, it's not a dishwasher that we're dealing with that has got a 1-year warranty, and yes, it continues to work on. Who knows? Who's going to stand behind that vest and let someone shoot them after a year to find out if it does work? If the manufacturer tells me it's a 5-year warranty, I believe the manufacturer.
And last time you and I talked, you didn't deny that there very well could be and were vests that were between 10 and 16 years old. Burns said, quote, I didn't monitor them. I had a training officer that worked with my chief deputy. You're making it sound like we didn't do anything. That's just not true. Just because he wants to order 40 vests doesn't mean we didn't keep safe vests on our officers. Burns told me other departments may very well be in similar situations with expired vests. But a public records request revealed not so. These 5 counties are all within the 5-year range, and Carter County should have a handful of new vests by the new year. There's a federal grant designed solely to help provide bullet-resistant body armor for officers. As for Burns, the most recent time we can confirm he received that federal grant money for new vests was 2012.
I feel it hadn't been cut correctly in the first place, and it should come to the belly button. And here's the top of the vest.
Burns stands by what he said, that he never put an officer in danger.
There's not a county or city around here that can't afford a vest for their officers. I don't believe it. They can't afford not to buy them.
In the midst of putting themselves in harm's way every day, it's a risk surrounding departments and Greene County moving forward are not willing to take.
It shouldn't have never happened. And I hope that in my term as sheriff here that it never will happen.